Welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. Today we get to wrap up the adventure of Esther. We'll be in chapters 7 through 10. Here we go. Remember, Haman just been humiliated in front of Mordecai and all the people of the city. Haman had built a gallows to impale Mordecai on. That backfired, and now he's on his way with grief back to a banquet with Esther and the king. So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Esther? It will be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed and to be killed and to be annihilated. If we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king." So she says, look, here's what I want. I want my people to be spared. There's been a plot against us to murder us all, to annihilate us. If it had just been a plot to subject us all to slavery, I would have left you alone. But they're seeking to put us to death. And the king said to Queen Esther, because now remember, the king does not know yet that she's a Jew. The king said, "Who is he? And where is he? Who has dared to do this?" And Esther said, "A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. So can you imagine? Haman doesn't know she's a Jew. They're sitting there at dinner. They're eating food, drinking wine. And the king's like, "All right, queen." So king, I'm imagining the king at the head of the table. Queen's on one side, Haman's on the other. And he's like, "Well, tell me what you want. Up to half your kingdom, up to half the kingdom is yours." And she's like, "I just want my life to be spared and my people to be spared because somebody's trying to kill us." And I wonder if at this moment, Haman is like, "Oh, crud. Like, I know where this is going." Or if I wonder if he's like, "Who? Like, what's happening? Who is this? Who are her people?" Like, if he's quizzical. Either way, the king is outraged. And he goes, "Who is this?" And she goes, "It's a wicked foe, an enemy. And it's Haman." And she like indicates Haman. And I just imagine that the color drained from Haman's face in this moment, and the king flies into a fury. It says this, verse 7, "The king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking and went into the palace garden." So he's so mad, he just gets up from the table and leaves. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. And the king, so Haman is begging the queen for his life, and he's fallen down on her couch, her seat, touching her, right? Like grabbing hold of her. And the king returns from the palace garden to the place where they're drinking as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, "Will you even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?" As the words left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance to the king, said, "Hey, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose words saved the king, is standing at Haman's house. It's 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Then hang him on that." And they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the wrath of the king was turned aside. Chapter 8. On the next day, the king gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. So they give to Queen Esther the house of Haman, right? All of his property. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told her their relationship, that he's her cousin. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and given it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king, and she fell at his feet and wept and pleaded for him to avert the evil plan that had been devised against the Jews. Now remember, the king cannot overturn the law. The law's already been made that the Jews are to be attacked on the 13th day of the 12th month. He can't overturn that. But the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther arose and stood before the king, and she said, "If it please the king, if I found favor in your sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, let an order be written to revoke the letters of Haman, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then the king said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked." So he says, you write whatever you need to write to the Jews, and you write it with the king. You write it in the name of the king, and you write it sealed with the king's ring, which he's already given to Mordecai. And he goes, because whatever's written by the king, whatever's sealed by the king, can't be turned away. So he says, Mordecai, handle it however you see best. The king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month on the 23rd day. So here we have the 23rd day of the month, 3rd month in this 12th year, okay? So this is now 2 months after. So go back to the 13th day of the 1st month when Haman sent the letters out to everybody. Basically, this took about 2 months to unfold. It took about 2 months for all the news to be kind of dissipated and for everybody to kind of know what's going on, and for Mordecai to have the conversation with Esther. And Esther was prayed and fasted over for 3 days. And then after 3 days, she had a banquet. And so like all of this took about 2 months from the time that they've decided to kill the Jews. The king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, in the 23rd day, and an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded. And he wrote in the name of the king, and he sealed it with the king's ring, and he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that they were using the king's services and bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed that the Jews who were in every city to gather and to defend their lives and to destroy and to kill and to annihilate any people of the province who might try to attack them, children, women included, and to plunder their goods. So he says, hey, Jews, on this day that you're supposed to be attacked, you have every right to defend yourself. The king has said that's fine. And anyone who tries to attack you, you can put to death instead. On one day throughout the provinces of the king, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all the peoples, and the Jews were ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So the couriers mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's services. They rode out hurriedly, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, and a great golden crown on his head, and a robe of linen and purple, in the city of Susa, shouted and rejoiced. Now, you might not remember this, but a couple of days ago we saw that when Susa first heard the news that the Jews were to be killed, there was great confusion. When Susa hears now that the Jews can defend themselves, there's rejoicing and shouting. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province, listen to this, wherever the king's command and his edicts was reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many of the people of the country declared themselves to be Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen on them. So check this out. The people are being... The Jews are rejoicing that they get to defend themselves, and that the Jews can attack and kill anyone who's trying to attack and kill them. So a lot of the people are like, yeah, I'd like to be a Jew, please. I want to be a Jew now, so that if I get attacked, like, I don't want you to kill me, so can I be a Jew with you? Can I be on your side? And so they're switching sides, and they're coming over to the sides of the Jews. Now, in the 12th month, this is chapter 9, in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same month, when the king's command and edict were to be carried out, on that very day when the enemy of the Jews hoped to gain mastery over them, the reverse occurred, and the Jews gained mastery over all who hated them. So the Jews struck all of their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did as they pleased to those who hated them. In Susa, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. And that very day, the number of those killed in Susa, the citadel, was reported to the king. The king said to Queen Esther, in Susa, the citadel, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and also the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your wish? It will be granted to you. What further request do you have, O queen? It will be fulfilled. And she said, if it pleases the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow to do the same thing that they did today, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded that this would be done, and a decree was issued in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa gathered also on the 14th day of the month and killed another 300 men in Susa, but they laid no hands on the plunder. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces gathered to defend their lives and got relief from their enemies and killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they laid no hands on the plunder. This was the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day and on the 14th, and then rested on the 15th day, making that day a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore, all the Jews in the villages who live in the rural towns celebrate the 14th day of the month as a day for gladness and as a day for gladness and feasting, as a holiday, and as a day on which they send gifts and food to one another. Then Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in the provinces, obliging them to keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and also keep the 15th day of the same year as a feast day year by year. So the Jews accepted what they had started to do and what Mordecai had written to them. But when it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that this evil plan that was devised against the Jews should return upon Haman's own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, they called these days Purim, after the term Pur, because they had cast the lots, right? Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter and all that they faced in this matter and what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their offspring and all who joined them without fail that they would keep these 2 days every year as feast days. And then you jump down to chapter 10, it says, the king imposed a tax on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the books of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to the king, and he was great among the Jews, and popular with the multitudes of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all of his people. So Esther here is put in this position to protect the people of God in a time of kind of foreign, they're dwelling amongst these foreign people. They haven't ever been returned to Israel after the original captivity of Assyria and Babylon. So Daniel, he went ahead of all the people into Babylon, right? You've got Joseph, who went ahead of all the people into Egypt. And you've got Moses, who was put in a position of authority ahead of the people of God in Egypt. And so God does this. He keeps putting these people forward into places of authority where they can provide deliverance for the people of God and rescue for the people of God. And so that's the story of Esther. I love it. I think it's a great story. And then the next 2 days, we are going to be in Malachi. We've got 4 chapters left of the Old Testament. We'll do Malachi 1 and 2 tomorrow. We'll see you then. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible through another section of Scripture where we come to know and understand God a little bit better. Look, if you're brand new to Simpler Bible, we have all sorts of resources available for you. Go to our website, simplerbible.com, and there you can find these videos, you can find our podcast, you can find links to our social media, and you can even find a blog post with additional scriptures if you want to go into a little bit more study than we had time to cover in this podcast and video today. We hope that this tool will be exactly that for you, a tool. Not something that replaces your daily walk with God, but something that enhances your daily walk with God and helps you to know and enjoy Him more. Thank you so much for being part of this, and we'll see you again tomorrow.